Genesis is the book of beginnings. Not only is it the first book of the Bible, it begins the story, it also shows us the beginning of everything in creation. From creation itself, the earth, the heavens, mankind, animals, plants. It also tells us how sin first started, how it entered the world. It also explains the rise of the nations itself, how mankind spread across the world. And finally, it explains how Israel, God's nation, his chosen people, how they start with one man named Abraham. Welcome everyone back to the Geologian. I am Joshua Woodard, and today we're going to be bridging some gaps between you and the Bible, starting with Genesis. Today we're only going to get through the first 5 verses of the book, but there is a lot in here. And before we dive into verse by verse teaching, I would like to talk a little bit about the book itself, about some general structures and themes that will kind of, it will explain a little bit more, add some context to everything. And then we'll get into the teaching itself. So first, as we talked about, it's a book of beginnings, both in the Hebrew and the Greek. For the title of the book, it is beginning or origins in some cases. So the author of this book, there's a lot of debate about who wrote this book, who wrote the Pentateuch. That is the first 5 books of the Bible, Penta being 5, Tuch being scroll. There's a lot of debate about that. I am not going to get into that today. That's an important topic, and I think a lot of people struggle with that, specifically students who go to seminary who teach the opposing views of this. But it's going to take a lot of time, and I don't have that time today. But if people are wanting this, if you guys want me to talk about the opposing theory of who wrote the Old Testament, or excuse me, who wrote Genesis, who wrote the Pentateuch, who edited them together, I'll do that at another time. As for this, though, traditionally, it's Moses. Moses wrote, or at least edited, Genesis together. And this is echoed by the Old Testament, the New Testament, and Jesus himself, that Moses is the individual who wrote this. Again, I'm not going to get into that a lot. If you want me to, I will add some verses down below that you guys can kind of go look at. Moses spoke face-to-face with God often, and he was often commanded to write down God's words, so it would make sense that he would do so. And like I said, Jesus himself spoke that Moses was the one who wrote the Pentateuch, the law, Genesis, all of it together. And there are a lot of other things internally that make sense only if Moses was the author. But like I said, I'm not going to get into that today. So for our purposes, Moses was the author. So how about some structure? Some structure of the book. It's often split up between chapters 1 through 11 and then 12 through 50, which is the end of the book. However, this is probably just because of subject matter. So like I spoke at the beginning, 1 through 11 is sort of this broad, how everything began, how mankind spreads across the world, and then it zooms in chapter 12 for Abraham. Abraham is a man that God calls and says, blesses him and gives him a promise that he will be a great nation, or of many nations, a father of many nations, and directly from him will be Israel, will come the whole nation. There's another very, very unique, and it blows my mind that it's in here. I think it's really cool. It's called the Toledot pattern or structure that's within the whole book of the Bible. In the whole book of Genesis. So the word Toledot is a Hebrew word that it often gets translated as these are the generations of, or this is the account of. The first one that shows up in the text of Genesis is actually Genesis 2 verse 4, and it says this is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created. Chapter 5, it says these are the generations of Adam, or that came from Adam. And it goes all the way through the book. There are 11 of them, all the way down through Jacob. So from Adam, Noah, Shem, Terah, Ishmael, Esau, or Isaac, excuse me, then Esau and Jacob. All of those individuals have these phrases before them. These are the generations of. This is the account of. And every one, it kind of like zooms in on someone and explains what happens from the named individual. What did they do? Who came from them? What are the events there? And so I'm going to quote Jonathan Sarfati. He kind of sets up this list. He actually sets up 0 through 11, so 12 total, which is a specific number for the Bible. 12 tribes. This is very significant. He states that the phrase, the Toledot, these are the generations of it, takes the results of the preceding section and he propels it forward. Excuse me, the Toledot, it propels it forward in the narrative. It takes what happened before and keeps moving through the story. The text following the Toledot, it kind of recounts what the subjects went to do in history. So I mentioned there being 0 through 11, though the first one only pops up in Genesis 2. Where's the first one? What is 0? He calls this the precursor. So we talked about how the Toledot, it names an individual. So for example, Adam. These are the generations of Adam in chapter 5. And it talks about his genealogy. What happened post Adam? And how does that continue on in the story? There was nothing before God. As we'll get into the text, we see that in the beginning, God is already there. So it's the rest of them assume that there has been something before. So for the first one, this is the account, or these are the generations of the heavens and the earth. It's saying like when they were post them being created, this is what comes from them. Or Adam, it's always the assumed there's something before it. But at the beginning, there's nothing. It's just God. And so I'll explain that a little bit more, but let's get into the verses. I just wanted to show you that structure. It shows that the book is one continuous whole story from the beginning to the end, and it's just beautiful. And as we get through Genesis, I'll point back at those Toledots, and I think you'll find that structure very interesting. So we're going to read the text together. I'm going to put it over here on the other screen so you guys can see it. So here on the left is actually the list I pulled from Jonathan Sarfati's book, the Genesis account. You can see 0 through 11. But over on the right, we're going to read this text together. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was a formless and desolate emptiness. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, one day. All right, so starting off, like I said, in the beginning, God is already there. There's no explanation of how God is created because he is the uncreated creator. Before there was anything, he's already there. So this is actually a vast difference between the other creation accounts. So the Babylonians had their own account. The Egyptians had their idea of how everything began. The Canaanites had their idea how it began. But the Israelites, this understanding in Genesis is so different. See, for the others, their gods were created. They were born, or they were formed through war, or other physical patterns, other physical manifestations. Their gods appeared. Not to the Hebrews. To the Israelites, God is uncreated. He is the creator of everything. Nothing created him. There's nothing above him. It's all beneath him. And so I think that's really cool. And we see that God creates out of nothing. There's no matter already there described in the text. He's not shaping something. He is just creating by his will. So we get the name Elohim for God. That is the Hebrew Elohim. And this name is something that is transcendent. It's a title. It's often described as a title, but it is something that describes an individual as being transcendent, almighty, divine. And this is the perfect name for God here, because he is above his creation. Like I just said, he is all-powerful, willing, speaking creation into existence. And that's exactly who we meet here, God, the Almighty, Elohim. Another interesting aspect of his name is that it's plural. And this sounds weird, but in Hebrew, there can be a singular, plural nouns along with the verbs, things how you conjugate them. You give them singular or plural as well. But Elohim is not a singular name or a noun. It actually means gods. But it is most definitely talking about one person. So the traditional Christian interpretation is that this is the Trinity in action. The Hebrews would have had no understanding of this. They would not have thought that God has tripersonal or even multi-personal. It was just God. But through the New Testament, we see that Jesus and the Holy Spirit are here as well in creation. So going to John 1. So this is the Gospel of John, chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and apart from him, not even one thing came into being that has come into being. In him was life, and the light was the life of mankind. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not grasp it or understand it. Is another way to translate that. So here, John in his gospel is tying on this phrase. In the very start of his text, he says, "In the beginning." And it's the exact same words in Greek, "in the beginning." So he's immediately tying to their understanding of, hey, remember what happened in Genesis? In the beginning was the Word. So their minds, an individual who is familiar with Genesis is going to think, oh, God. Here he says the Word. And he explains to us later in the text that the Word is Jesus, that this word, this logos in the Greek, he's already there. He is with God. So he didn't get created. He's with God. So now there's two. But he's also, the Word was God. This is the Trinity in action. That they're two, but they're the same. This is the tri-personal being that is God, Elohim, plural. Yet create in verse 1 of Genesis is singular. So I think it's very possible that this is what he's tying to. And we've already read that he creates light. And the very next passage is that he was the light of mankind, and the light shines in the darkness. And that's exactly what we see in Genesis 1. So John is showing us that Jesus is here in the beginning of creation. And it's actually through him that all of this comes into existence. And I think that's beautiful. So then we can move on to the next is heavens and the earth. So that kind of sets up the two realms that the story of creation takes place in. God creates those two realms, and he's filling them or forming them. He fills the seas, he fills the land with plants and animals, he fills the heavens with stars and birds. But also, it is that, but it's a specific figure of speech. It is a special... It's a tool here. However, so it's known as a merism is what it's called. So the heavens and the earth, these are two opposites, or not opposing, but they are two sides, right? They're different. You have one above, one below, so they are in a sense opposites. But you juxtapose, you put them together, you combine them to encompass a whole, the entirety of a concept. So this is a common figure of speech in all of the Old Testament, but also we use it today in English. So for example, think of Taco Bell is open night and day. I don't know if that's the case still with COVID, but it's open day and night and day. We put these two things together to say it's open 24 hours. These two are opposites, but they encompass a whole. And that's exactly what the text is doing here. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And that is it. The author is saying that God created everything. Anything that's been created, God did it. And it's not a coincidence that that John also says of Jesus that not even one thing that came into being that is in existence came into being without him. Like Jesus, it was through Jesus that everything came into existence. Just like verse 1 of Genesis, in the beginning God created everything, the heavens and the earth. And I think that's, again, it's a wonderful and beautiful connection. In the very next verse, I'm skipping up on a word. The word for create, bara, is the Hebrew. That word is only ever used of God in his creative acts. It's a divine, new, awe-inspiring creation. It's never used of humankind. Human creations or human acts of creative activity, it's not used to describe them. It's only ever God. So this is a divine moment. Additionally, the verb form of this word of bara, it is used to describe something that's being brought into existence that has never been before. So it's also used of Adam and Eve later in the text. He's bringing them into existence. Mankind didn't exist prior to this. It's a new, divine, world-changing creation that he's doing here, which is just, this is important. This is significant here, that this word is used of God creating. Okay, so now we're on to the next verse in the text. And the story focuses on the second realm of creation. Remember, heavens and earth, and it moves to earth. And the earth was a formless and desolate emptiness, and the darkness was over the surface of the deep. So some of you might be scratching your heads at this translation. Other translations, I'm using the NASB here, but other translations will say it was a formless void or waste and void. It's more an adjective, it's describing it, but here actually the Hebrew, they're nouns. The earth was a formless and desolate emptiness. And some people actually here, they like to try and say, they compare Genesis 1 verse 2 with a chapter out of Jeremiah. And they like to say that, I'm just going to read the verse to you. In Jeremiah chapter 4, the prophet Jeremiah is describing a judgment that's going to come on the land and on the nations. And he says, I looked at the earth, and behold, it was a formless and desolate emptiness. So some people some scholars will interpret Genesis 1 verse 2 as a description of the earth that has been destroyed, and now it's being recreated. And then there was a time between verses 1 and 2 of Genesis. And this is called like a gap theory. And I'm not gonna go into it like super deep here, because it gets into the age of the earth. And like I said, I want to dedicate more time later to that. This is just going to be about theology and about the story that God is revealing himself to us and his plan. I bring this up though, because it's important, and we're here in the text. They're kind of reading Jeremiah back onto Genesis, when we should be using Genesis to understand Jeremiah. So if we actually read lower in Jeremiah, he says, I looked at the earth, and behold, it was a formless and desolate emptiness. And I looked at the heavens, and they had no light. I looked on the mountains, and behold, they were quaking. And at the hills, they jolted back and forth. I looked, and behold, there was no human. And all the birds of the sky had fled. I looked, and behold, the fruitful land was a wilderness, and all the cities were pulled down. So we see that it's formless and desolate or empty because there's no inhabitants. The humans are gone. The animals are gone. The fruit, it's no longer cultivated. It's blank of a fruitful land. It's blank. And the cities are destroyed. It's empty. And what Jeremiah is doing, he's actually alluding back to Genesis, saying this judgment is going to be so bad that the land will be like creation was the beginning, formless and empty of all things. And so we see that when God creates the earth, it's blank, it's empty. There's no inhabitants yet. There's no humans. There's no animals. It's like a lump of clay that the potter is going to use and shape and fill later on. And so we see that there's darkness over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God is hovering over the surface of the waters. So here we see that all we have is a empty, formless earth with water. So the deep is like these oceans. And the Spirit of God now is hovering over the surface of those waters. So here we have the Spirit of God. It's not just Elohim, but his Spirit is there too. And we've already talked about John, how Jesus is here. Here we have the the entirety of the Trinity now here at creation, at work. And he says, let there be light. Then God said, let there be light, and there was light. The first thing that God creates, we know that God does create darkness. There's a passage out of Isaiah that says this. But the first thing that Genesis describes as God speaking into existence is light itself. And that's so wild to me, that when God creates, he just wills or speaks it into existence, and it is so. When God speaks, creation responds, and this is powerful. And then he looks on his creation. He says he saw the light was good. So I did some study on the word of good. I was trying to figure out what does this mean, because good can mean morally good. It can mean pleasing, pleasant. It could mean this is correct or right. I'm trying to figure out exactly what God means when he's looking on it and describing it, when it's from God's perspective here, when God saw that the light was good. This is him describing, saying that this thing that I've created, it is reflecting my goodness. God is the standard of goodness. So if he calls something good, it's reflecting his goodness, that this is how it's supposed to be. Additionally, I read a few papers from some scholars that talked about this phrase, saw that the light was good, saw that this item was good. This is common for like a craftsman, a potter, or like a carpenter to look at their work and examine it and say, this is what I intended. This is perfect. This is everything it's supposed to be. This is good. And like I just said, this makes sense that God is looking on and saying, yes, this is how it's reflecting goodness, me. This is good for creation. And then God does this next thing here. He separates light from the darkness. God is one of order, not of chaos. Things are not just willy-nilly flying around. He is separating things, not because it's fighting. I know some people think that there's a war here, and there's not. Like I said, it's different. He is ordering things. He creates, and then he gives them functions and purposes and names. And he's ordering his creation for later for there to be inhabitants. He's setting it up for the filling of his creation with animals and eventually humanity. So he separates them, and then he gives them a name. And this is significant as well. In the ancient Near East, in this with the Israelites and the Canaanites, Egyptians, all of these individuals would have understood that naming something is a position of authority. If you were able to name something, give it a name, you have authority over it, which God created everything. This makes sense. But he's also giving this a function. There's light and there's darkness, but he gives it a name, and by doing so, he's giving it a sort of purpose. And we see that purpose directly after this. And there was evening and there was morning one day. So the light that he calls day, it's going to govern the daytime hours, and the darkness is going to govern the nighttime hours. And later we'll see that the sun and the moon and the stars, they will actually be the agents that are using the light and darkness to govern night and day. We just don't have them yet. But he has set this up on the first day. And there was evening and there was morning one day. So I'm not going to get into here the one day, evening and morning. I don't want to discuss how old is the earth. Like I said, I want to do that later because I want to focus on the theology here of who God is and how he's describing his plan to us. I want to get into that later. So when I have more time to I don't want to overshadow what this discussion is currently. I will say though, when you have evening and morning here, it kind of defines it as being a single day. 24 hours seems likely here. That doesn't get away from, is this metaphorical? Is this an allegory? All of those other explanations. But I'll discuss that later at a later time. Currently here, we have verses 1 through 5. God is in the beginning. He is almighty, transcendent, and he creates everything, the heavens and the earth. Earth is a lump of clay that he is starting to order and shape and get ready for his creation, to fill it and to make it right. When he looks on his creation, it is good, it is perfect, the way it's supposed to be, reflecting his goodness and his rightness. And this ends the first day. And I just want to tie back that Jesus, our Savior, is also God the Creator. It is through him that all of this comes into existence. And this is just so beautiful, that the God who created everything, who spoke and willed things into existence and is above all of these things, he is also Emmanuel, God with us, who came down in a lowly form of an infant and lived amongst us. He suffered, he took on our sin, died for us, and rose again to give us a new life. And we'll see later on why he had to do that, why Jesus had to come, and that's going to be the interest of sin. And we'll get to that eventually. But today, that's all we're going to go through, verses 1 through 5. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this helped kind of bridge a gap, possibly. We're going to get even more into that. I want to a future video of kind of explaining similarities and differences between the other creation accounts of the other nations like Babylon and Egypt, as well like in comparison to the biblical creation account. I want to show their similarities and differences, sort of like we did today, but in a lot more detail. But next time we're going to get into the next few verses, the next couple of days, and show what God is doing now and how he's ordering and shaping everything. I hope you guys enjoyed the beginning of our Genesis study and are excited to continue on just as I am. If you guys have any questions or thoughts, please feel free to put them below in the comments section. If you have any other questions you want answered when we do our question and answer videos, please put them below, like I said, or send them in an email to me, and I'll include the email down below in the description for the video. Before you go, make sure you click that subscribe button and hit that bell so you get notifications when I drop the next video for our studies. And please check out the other videos as they come up. Thanks, guys.